This I believe. A few weeks ago, I shared my journey from Christianity to Unitarian Universalism, and how Christianity felt judgmental and scary, Unitarianism as comforting and welcoming. Taking a deeper look into how my beliefs have evolved, I realize much of that has been shaped based on what I don't believe. When I was in elementary school, our next-door neighbor invited the kids in our immediate neighborhood to come to her house for weekly Bible lessons. I really liked this woman, Mrs. Bishop, who was grandmotherly, always wore an apron as though she had just finished or was just about to start baking. And she was so generous with her warm smile. I remember wondering why many of the other kids seemed so familiar with the stories and the characters in them, but I didn't ask. My parents were not regular attendees at church and rarely made so much of a reference to God or Jesus, except when they swore. So, while I was comfortable listening to Mrs. Bishop tell her stories and spending time with my friends, I didn't feel any connection to these stories. I recall being very confused when she talked about God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. How can one person be all of those things? Was it my young mind that was unable to comprehend, or was it my lack of experience with religion? I still don't know. Fast forward a few years to that day that I told you about, where we were in our basement in Michigan, waiting out a tornado warning. I was hoping and praying with a minister I barely knew that a tornado would not hit our house. The prayer and minister's presence were not comforting and didn't bring me any closer to God. At that time, I had a vague belief that God was the grand master of our fate, that there was this being that held a script for our life path. So probably like many kids, I wondered why he would allow such terror and devastation. As a young adult looking for a spiritual community, my beliefs seemed to begin taking shape. I knew my family and relationships were important to me, and they brought spiritual experiences. My parents, my 4 siblings, grandparents, extended family, all meant the world to me, and still do, of course. At 26 and newly divorced, I came into a group of young professionals who spent lots of time outdoors adventuring, and they quickly became my tribe. The strong belief in relationships is similar to what composer Leonard Bernstein describes in his This I Believe essay called The Mountain Disappears. It begins with, I believe in people. I feel, love, need, and respect people above all else, including the arts, natural scenery, organized piety, or nationalistic superstructures. That first paragraph touched me deeply, and I too believe in people. Don't get me wrong, I love the arts and the great outdoors, but I do get greater enjoyment and appreciation when others are a part of that experience. I also believe in a higher power. And I didn't really realize this until I had a conversation, also in my 20s, with my grandmother. Her name was Pauline Weaver, and we called her Grandma Weaver. Remember that our family was not church-going, and we didn't talk about religion or God. But I had a rare opportunity to have a deep conversation with my grandmother when she was grieving the loss of her sister, Irene, with whom she was very close. Auntie Irene was a devout Christian, a church lady, as our friend Sheila Sullivan would say. So I asked Grandma about her own belief, Did she believe that Auntie Irene was in a better place? She said she didn't know, but that Irene believed in God and probably thought she would be with God and Jesus when she died. But Grandma Weaver didn't believe in that kind of God, but rather a higher power. I was blown away. We talked more about what that meant for each of us, and it was surprisingly similar. We agreed in the belief in a higher power that is an energy connecting us all. It is our conscience that guides us to, hopefully, do the right thing, be good to others. I also believe that this higher power is not God in the way that I used to think about God, having a script for all people, determining their destiny, but instead it somehow offers a guidance. When I met my husband, I rear-ended him. And I walked away from that experience with feelings that I must see this person again. It wasn't just his handsome smile and his sense of humor at our silly experience, but there was a universal energy trying to tell me something. Little did I know we would still be together nearly 27 years later. Another concept that I spent a lot of time pondering is that of heaven and hell. To me, these are not spiritual destinations when one dies. I wish I believed that when I die, I will be with my parents, and that I will be with my grandparents, and all the other people who have passed along the way. I wish I could believe that Grandma Weaver is working in her garden and drinking lemonade with Auntie Irene. But I believe that when we die, what lives on is the memory others have of us. Heaven and hell, to me, are a state of mind that we experience each in any given period of time. This formed in me when I took a personal development workshop a number of years ago, in which we explored the concept that I attract that which occurs. It doesn't mean that I have intentionally or unintentionally caused something to happen, but my being attracted the experience. And how that relates to heaven and hell is that for me, when bad things happen, somehow my being attracted the situation or experience as a necessary part of life, maybe for learning, or just because that is the natural way. Think of it as hell on earth. But when good things happen, it may be good luck, or a reward for hard work or doing good, or karma, heaven on earth. As a UU, I appreciate the many opportunities to challenge and explore my beliefs. So while I may have certain beliefs today, I am open to continue listening and learning. This I believe. Today's reading is an excerpt from This I Believe, an essay written by Eleanor Roosevelt, and her essay is titled Growth That Starts from Thinking. It seems to me a very difficult thing to put into words the beliefs we hold and what they make you do in your life. I think it was fortunate because I grew up in a family where there was a very deep religious feeling. I don't think it was spoken of a great deal. It was more or less taken for granted that everybody held certain beliefs and needed certain reinforcements of their own strength, and that came through your belief in God and your knowledge of prayer. But as I grew older, I questioned a great many of the things that I knew very well my grandmother, who brought me up, had taken for granted. And I think I might have been quite a difficult person to live with if it hadn't been for the fact that my husband once said, "It didn't do you any harm to learn those things, so why not let your children learn them?" When they grow up, they'll think things out for themselves. And that gave me a feeling that perhaps that's what we all had to do. Think out for ourselves what we could believe and how we could live by it. And so I came to the conclusion that you had to use this life to develop the very best that you could develop. I don't know whether I believe in a future life. I believe that all you go through here must have some value. Therefore, there must be some reason. And there must be some going on. How exactly that happens, I've never been able to decide. There is a future that I'm sure of, but how, that I don't know. And I came to feel that it didn't really matter very much because whatever the future held, you'd have to face it when you came to it. Just as whatever life holds, you have to face it in exactly the same way. And the important thing was that you never let down doing the best that you were able to. It might be poor because you might not have very much within you to give or to help other people with or to live your life with. But as long as you did the very best you were able to do, then that was what you were put here to do, and that was what you were accomplishing by being here. And so I have tried to follow that out and not to worry about the future or what was going to happen. I think I am pretty much of a fatalist. You have to accept whatever comes, and the only important thing is you meet it with courage and with the best that you have to give.
The poet Wendell Berry wrote, "And the world cannot be discovered by a journey of miles, no matter how long, but only by a spiritual journey, a journey of 1 inch, very arduous and humbling and joyful, by which we arrive at the ground at our feet and learn to be at home." I'd like to share with you some of my spiritual journey. Didn't start with a sterling beginning. I was raised Jewish, culturally Jewish, not religiously Jewish. We never discussed God. We never discussed religious questions. To this day, I don't know what my parents believed. We ate Jewish foods. We identify ourselves as Jews, but the details were held at a distance. By the time I was a teenager, I had left the religion behind. And for decades, I occasionally said to myself that someday I would like to explore what spirituality means to me. Well, someday took about 40 years, and it arrived in 2007 when I wandered into a typical Sunday service at a UU church in Petaluma, California, where I lived for 24 years. But for the very first time, sitting in the pews, I felt that I had a personal connection to religion. I liked it, and I kept going back. And as I attended those services each week, I was finally hearing a version of religion that was understandable to me. Of course, you go to synagogue, they're speaking in Hebrew, so, you know. But despite the fact that this was in English, it was touching me, and I was hearing concepts like spirit and sacredness. And within a few months, I was asked to deliver a short talk to the congregation for a service that was given quarterly at that church. It was called This I Believe. And some of you may be familiar with This I Believe. If you aren't, I'll explain. It's a series of services in which members of the congregation are asked to write a 10 or 20-minute speech about what they grew up with, what they believe now, how their interests or how their religious beliefs have changed. So when I was asked to do this, it was the first time anyone had ever asked me what I believed in. It was a little intimidating. And for the first time, I actually had to think, what do I believe in? And being a UU has given me the opportunity to explore at my own pace what is spiritually important to me. And it has been and continues to be one of the richest experiences of my life. I've made it part of my spiritual practice to explore those essential existential questions. In some cases, I've come up with answers, and others, I just haven't. Reality as I experience it, is that we humans are born, and the possibilities for how we live life are enormously varied depending upon what country we live in, what culture we're raised in, whether we're rich or comfortable or poor. We may become self-aware or not. We will experience joy and sadness and anger and hurt and love and grief and any combination of those emotions throughout a lifetime. We will marry or not. We will parent or not. We will live in community or not. We will work, we will build, whatever form it takes, we will live our life, and then we'll die. Everybody dies. Even the people who refuse to believe that they're going to die, they're going to die. And for most of us, that simple truth is terrifying. So some of us turn to religion to help us think about the answer to those essential questions, those cosmic, scary, take your breath away questions. Well, going back to my UU in Petaluma, after a few months after I gave that This I Believe talk, two of the members of the worship committee cornered me and asked me if I wanted to serve on the worship committee. And I said to them, you do realize I'm Jewish and I'm an atheist? And they said, yeah. I knew I'd reached the right place. And so began my deeper dive into spirituality. We were a lay-led congregation, and every 6 to 8 weeks I was assigned to lead a service. Planning those services became sacred time. It really did. I felt like I was nourishing a part of myself that I hadn't even known existed. When it came time to plan a service, I would read everything I could get hold of, and I would think deeply about the subject matter. Sacred time. A few years after I joined the UU Worship Committee in Petaluma, my friend Meredith and I decided to develop a service called A Conversation About God. I took the atheist position, Meredith took the theist position. Now, I really like Meredith. I respect her a great deal. She's intelligent, she's educated, she's a teacher, she's a writer. She didn't start out that way. Well, she was always intelligent. And this is going to sound like a terrible throwing under the bus. She grew up in Mississippi. She was brought up in a Baptist church, and her name was Tom. So her life has been filled with some very difficult challenges, and yet she maintains a deep and abiding belief in God. She will tell you that her relationship with God has brought her priceless gifts. And I have to say, in some ways, I envy that relationship that she has that I don't. So we decided we were going to do this service, and for 2 months we met every couple of weeks at Meredith's house, and we had dinner, and we talked. We asked each other the hard questions and explored our answers. I asked her, if there's a God, why is there rape? Why is there war? Why is there murder? I thought that was a pretty reasonable question. She asked me, well, if there isn't a God, why is there so much beauty and music and poetry and ballet and all these other wonderful things in the world? Did those just happen? I went to the library as part of this, and I took out over a dozen books about God. Some were by theists, some were by agnostics, and some were by atheists, and I read all of them. I wanted to open my mind to the possibility that I could change my belief. Is there a divine intelligence that created the earth and all of its inhabitants? Do I have it within me to let go of that control that I like and have faith in a being I can't see and I can't hear? At the end of the process, I came to a much softer form of atheism. I now realize that I may never know whether or not there is a divine being, but I'm leaving a space open for the possibility. Maybe God is not an intelligent life form after all. God may be something altogether different, as Elaine was talking about. What I've realized is that there is magic and mystery in this world, and so much of it is what is beyond what we human beings can figure out. At any rate, back to our conversation about God. The Sunday for the service arrived, I hurried to the church, and about a half a block from the building, I tripped over some uneven sidewalk, dropped my teacup, which was very upsetting, twisted my foot, and fell on the ground. Petaluma is known for having uneven sidewalks. I just want to mention that. So I got up, I hobbled into the building, and prepared to do the service. Interestingly, about the same time as that, Meredith got a nosebleed. That God I don't believe in was playing tricks on us. But we had a lovely, respectful conversation about faith and divinity, and we explored meaningful questions, and the congregation appreciated the discussion. Years before that conversation, when I was a younger adult, my big brother Stephen and I would get together, we'd spend time together, and he would sometimes ask me, "So Joyce, what's the meaning of life?" And then he'd walk by me and he'd kick me in the butt. As brothers often do, right? But it is a confounding question. What is the meaning of life? I don't know. Is there a meaning to life? There should be. I mean, why else are we here? I don't know. For me, these questions, though, are too important not to ask them. Even if we only ask them silently of ourselves in the middle of the night. Why am I alive? What does it mean? Why am I here? What should I do with this precious, limited time I've been given? How will I die? Why will I die? Will I experience anything after death? If the answer is yes, what's that going to be? If the answer is no, is this all there is? Is there heaven? Is there hell? Is there reincarnation? Did you see that documentary with Bishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama? And someone asked the Dalai Lama, "Is there reincarnation?" And he shrugged and said, "I don't know." That's his job. If he doesn't know, how the heck am I going to figure it? But I can't tell the answer to any of these questions. I don't know. And I find that the answers provided by some religions aren't very satisfactory. The Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost confused me as much as it did you, Elaine. And that's what draws me to UUism, a religion that encourages me to ask the questions and figure out my answers for myself, not for anybody else. And whatever those answers are, it's okay, you're welcome here. But I've learned that asking these big, hairy questions is one of the most important and authentic spiritual experiences I get to have. Asking these questions is exciting, and I find it fulfilling, even if I can't quite envision the answers. I have found some answers, in case you're wondering. I have come to believe that there is no inherent meaning in life. I make my own meaning. And the meaning that works for me is called tikkun olam. It's actually a Jewish concept, but ironically, I never heard about it when I was going to synagogue. I learned about it as a UU. Tikkun olam means the world is broken, and it's our job to fix it. Repair the world. That's the meaning I give to my life. It's a religious concept, but for me, it's also social and political, and it guides the life's work I do, my career. It guides many of the choices I make. It's such a beautiful concept, repair the world. What I love most about Tikkun Olam is that it demands action. Don't just think about repairing the world, do it. Transform your beliefs into concrete deeds and behaviors and ways of living. My particular meaning for life, my Tikkun Olam, is to make the world a more just and loving place. That may sound corny, but corny's okay. We need more corny. What I do is to protect non-human animals. And I know that some people hear that and they say, well, why don't you spend time working on humans? And the reason I work on animals is that billions of them suffer at our hands. And there are lots of people working for humans, but because they think that animals are unimportant, they don't work for animals. So I'm filling in the gap. I believe that even though animals will never write the great American novel or drive a bus, many, if not most of them, are conscious, and they have a sense of their own existence, and their lives are important, if not to you and me, to them. So my job is to help other people open their minds and hearts to include other living beings in our community of care and respect. I've been helped on my spiritual journey by poets, all of whom I discovered through UU. Rumi, Hafiz, Mary Oliver, Wendell Berry. Spiritual thinkers also, whose words and deeds really deeply inspire me. There was a 19th century Unitarian minister, and he was an abolitionist. His name was Theodore Parker. And he had this to say in a speech he gave in 1853 at a Massachusetts abolitionist convention. He said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." I imagine some of you have heard those words, probably associated with Reverend Martin Luther King, but it originated with a Unitarian minister, Theodore Parker. And Reverend Parker died in 1860. He didn't live long enough to see the end of slavery, but he held on to his faith that this painful and abhorrent practice would end. And that kind of faith keeps me grounded. His words remind me that the work I do to protect other animals may not be achieved soon, may not be achieved ever, but the quest for justice is worth believing in and working toward. I have faith that eventually justice will come. I believe that human beings are extraordinary in their capacities to comprehend, to create, to dream, and to do better. And what I hope is that human beings can embrace an understanding that they're not the pinnacle, yes, in intelligence, but there are so many other qualities. We are not the most important species on the earth. We are just one of the millions of species of plants and animals that inhabit this planet. And each species, each individual has significance. Our first UU principle affirms and promotes the inherent worth and dignity of every person. For me, it makes more sense to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every living being, acknowledging that each being has a right to live and to thrive. As a species, our inability or our refusal to see ourselves as part of this bigger whole has brought us to this terrible point we are now, this precipice that we're standing on. We have built an industrialized society dependent on fossil fuels, technology constantly getting better, getting more complicated, consumerism constantly. And for generations, because of that, we have mindlessly and carelessly polluted the oceans and the rivers and the air we breathe, and we've exploited the forests for lumber, and we've exploited the wild places. And now the earth is schooling us. Climate disaster. We've developed skyscrapers and sophisticated computers and life that's lived online rather than out in a meadow. We've built massive money-making industries. We've even flown to outer space. But to me, that only means that we've learned to build and buy stuff, okay? Those sorts of outward-facing accomplishments are one form of intelligence, yes, and achievement, but they're extractive. We've been takers. We've been takers more than we've been givers, and we are sucking the life out of our world. And the irony is that we may be our own undoing in the process. I believe that we can survive climate disaster, and we can build a better, kinder, more inclusive world, but to do that, we're going to have to find a way to evolve in here, embrace a deeper and more internal emotional intelligence. We, our children, our grandchildren, will survive and prosper if we can learn to fully comprehend that we are part of a much larger community of life. If we can learn to protect and respect and preserve other life forms with whom we inhabit the earth. Focus less on what's out there, focus more on what needs to grow in here. But if you are going to focus out there, consider the trees. I believe in the wisdom of trees. Now, I was not born with a consciousness of life around me, and for many years I didn't notice trees any more than I noticed broken sidewalk. But I have my spirituality and this awakening that I've undergone to thank for introducing me to the extraordinary lives that trees live, the communities that they form. Have you read about this? Boo! They support each other, they feed each other. I've learned that trees all over the world have a life force that is beautiful and whole in its own way. When I walk into a forest, I feel as if I have entered a divine community. And without the need for words, I'm praying. When I see a chipmunk or a deer in that forest, or a cow in a field, I'm gazing upon a being who is clearly different from me, but of equal value. Each of us has earned our place here. Mountains and lakes and streams are perfect. Let's just leave them alone. Returning inward, I believe that I must continue to ask the deep spiritual questions, because I am consciously in the here and now. When I treat others with kindness and compassion, when I contribute something to the betterment of the world, then I grow closer to being the person I want to be. I grow closer to being my best self. If I can live into tikkun olam, repair the world, if I can do my little bit to make the world a better place, then I will believe that I have lived a life that was worth living. Blessed be.